In the winter of 1855, the Kellerman family Hinrich, his wife Martha, and their 4 children vanished from their coal mine in the Kentucky Highlands. The official story claimed a catastrophic collapse had buried them, yet no bodies were ever found. For over 30 years, Harlan County accepted this tragedy as truth, until a deathbed confession in 1889 revealed a far darker reality. The Kellermans hadn't perished in an accident. They were murdered, their deaths staged to look like an industrial disaster, orchestrated by men who saw human lives as expendable in the pursuit of coal profits. Months before their disappearance, Hinrich, a German immigrant who had settled in the Appalachian town of Pine Ridge, discovered an immense high-quality coal vein on his rocky hillside property land he'd bought for 80 cents after locals scoffed at its worthlessness. By 1855, whispers of his discovery had spread, attracting the attention of the Cumberland Coal and Rail Company, led by the ruthless Jeremiah Whitlock, who was methodically seizing Kentucky's coal fields to fuel America's industrial boom. Viewing the Kellerman mine as a threat to his monopoly, Whitlock sent his cold-eyed agent Samuel Briggs to buy the property, offering $500, then $3,000, then $5,000. Each time Hinrich refused, knowing the mine's value exceeded $200,000, and envisioning it as his family's legacy. Briggs's tone soon shifted to veiled threats about accidents and isolation. Hinrich recognized the same predatory gaze he had seen in the industrial bosses of the Ruhr Valley men who destroyed anything or anyone that stood in their way. That night, speaking in German at the family table, Hinrich warned his wife and children that danger had found them in these mountains. Martha listened in silence, her concern deepening as Hinrich described his encounter with Briggs and his growing fear that their discovery had made them a target. In the weeks after Briggs's visit, subtle harassment escalated into open intimidation. Their mail became unreliable and then stopped entirely. Merchants, once eager for their business, now avoided them, and strangers appeared on the hills surrounding their property watching until Hinrich tried to approach, only to vanish into the trees. In Louisville, Jeremiah Whitlock was executing a well-practiced strategy against uncooperative landowners using the Cumberland Coal and Rail Company's influence to choke the Kellermans financially. Banks withdrew credit, suppliers refused service, and local officials turned hostile. Then came legal attacks, baseless claims questioning Hinrich's land deed, forcing him to spend time and money defending himself. But Hinrich was prepared. Every detail of his purchase was meticulously documented, making his position legally unassailable. Worse for Whitlock, Hinrich had begun bypassing Louisville, entirely selling his coal directly to dealers in Cincinnati and Nashville for premium prices. By late 1855, his example was emboldening other small owners to resist corporate buyouts, threatening Whitlock's carefully constructed monopoly. On a frigid December evening, Samuel Briggs offered his employer a grim solution. After months studying the Kellermans' routines, he proposed a plan disguised as an accident, one that would remove them and clear the way for Cumberland's takeover. Winter, when the family worked deepest in the mine, provided the perfect cover. A collapse then would be blamed on unsafe conditions and bad luck. Whitlock hesitated only briefly before authorizing what company records would later euphemistically call the Pine Ridge Solution. The date was set for December 23rd, when the family would be far underground and rescue would be impossible. Briggs arrived in Pine Ridge 3 days early, posing as a railroad surveyor and quietly observing the mine. He carried dynamite, claiming it was for clearing rock, but in truth it was meant to mimic a natural cave-in. Meanwhile, Hinrich's unease grew. Martha noticed him inspecting the mine's support beams, repeatedly muttering about dangers he had never worried over before. On December 21st, he confided to her that vivid dreams of the mine collapsing had left him shaken. They considered leaving for Nashville to visit Martha's sister, but the winter yields were too valuable. Hinrich decided they would work 2 more days, then close for Christmas. That choice, overheard by their son Johann and innocently repeated to other children in the town square, confirmed Briggs's timing. On December 22nd, under cover of darkness, Briggs placed his charges along the main tunnel supports. He designed the blast to cause a cascading collapse, ensuring no survivors and no recoverable bodies, the pattern matching genuine accidents he had studied across Appalachia. He even prepared a convincing geological report to present to authorities. That evening, the Kellermans sat down for their final meal together, unaware that the mountain above them had already been turned into their tomb. That night, Hinrich spoke proudly of the week's exceptional coal haul, teasing Martha about the fine Christmas gifts they could now afford. Wilhelm chattered about the mining cart his father promised to build, while Maria helped her mother prepare a special Christmas bread from an old family recipe. None of them could have imagined that within 12 hours, they would be dead victims of what would become America's first corporate-sponsored mass murder, a crime buried in silence for 34 years. December 23rd, 1855. Dawned gray and bitter cold. A sharp wind sweeping the Kentucky mountains with the promise of snow. As always in winter, the Kellermans rose before sunrise. Martha packed bread, cheese, and coffee, while Heinrich checked his tools by lamplight. The children dressed quickly in the frigid air, their breath misting as they readied for another day underground. From a hidden ridge a quarter-mile away, Samuel Briggs watched through field glasses, his vantage point giving him a clear view of both the mine entrance and the access road. His pocket watch read 6:47 a.m. when Hinrich lit the first lantern and led his family inside the last time anyone would see them alive. The Kellermans worked with the precision of habit, Hinrich and Johann chipping away at the deepest section of the main tunnel, Martha and Maria loading coal into carts. Wilhelm carrying smaller pieces and tending the lamps, and baby Elizabeth playing near her sisters in the warmer chamber. Briggs had set his charges to detonate at exactly 10:15 a.m., when he knew the family would be at their most vulnerable, far from the entrance, with no chance of escape. But at 9:30 a.m., an unexpected complication appeared. Thomas Hartley, a nearby farmer, arrived to inquire about buying coal. Briggs tensed as Hartley called toward the tunnel, stepping closer to the entrance. If the man entered, he'd either die in the blast or live to tell a story that could unravel the cover-up. Briggs's hand moved to the pistol in his coat, ready to silence the witness. But Hartley hesitated. After calling several more times without answer, the family too deep to hear, he left a short note, Hinrich. Thomas Hartley stopped by at 9:45 a.m. About winter coal will return this afternoon. That note would later serve as damning proof the family had been alive and working normally just 30 minutes before the collapse, contradicting official claims of slow-developing structural failure. At precisely 10:15 a.m., Briggs pressed the detonator. Current raced through copper wires hidden along the forest floor to the explosives deep in the mine. The blast roared through the mountains, shaking windows in Pine Ridge and sending flocks of startled birds into the sky. Just as planned, a 200-foot section of the main tunnel caved in, burying the Kellermans beneath thousands of tons of rock. Secondary collapses rumbled for nearly an hour, sealing their fate and erasing any hope of rescue. The mine was silent by midday, but the darkness in Kentucky's coal country had only just begun. If this story is sending chills down your spine, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit the like button to help us keep telling them, and subscribe so you never miss a tale like this. Let's follow the next chapter in this grim account of corporate murder and buried secrets. From his hidden perch, Samuel Briggs watched the dust plume rise from the destroyed mine, his expression cold and satisfied. Phase 1 of the Cumberland Coal and Rail Company's Pine Ridge solution was complete. Now came the delicate work, shaping the aftermath to keep the truth buried as deeply as the Kellermans themselves. Word of the collapse reached Pine Ridge within hours, carried first by the thunderous blast that echoed across the mountains, then by the towering dust cloud above the Kellerman property. Neighbors led by Thomas Hartley, whose afternoon visit had been prevented by the explosion, rushed to the site to find the entrance sealed under tons of boulders and splintered beams. Within half an hour, Briggs appeared from the town's direction, playing the part of a concerned railroad surveyor. He expressed just enough shock to seem genuine, while subtly casting doubt on the value of rescue efforts. When Hartley mentioned the note he had left at the mine entrance that morning, Briggs quickly dismissed it, claiming that, in the mountain winds, such scraps often blew around and couldn't be trusted for timing. Rescue attempts began at once, men abandoning Christmas preparations to dig barehanded into the frozen rock, their knuckles bleeding as they worked by torchlight. Reverend Isaac Thornberry led prayers, the women of Pine Ridge served coffee and food to the exhausted diggers, and children looked on with wide eyes, sensing the tragedy without fully understanding it. Hartley, racked with guilt, worked with near-manic determination, convinced that had he entered the mine earlier, he might have seen danger and warned the family. Briggs carefully nurtured this guilt, suggesting that amateur miners like the Kellermans often missed the warning signs a professional would spot. The manipulation was as deliberate as the blast. On the second day, hope briefly flared when diggers reached what seemed to be an air pocket. Shouts rang out, ropes were lowered, and men strained to widen the gap, listening for any sign of life. But when they broke through, they found only an empty chamber formed by the fall of rock. No bodies, no survivors. Briggs's unease sharpened. The cavity lay dangerously close to one of his blast sites. If the rescue continued, they might uncover fragments of dynamite or telltale patterns of an unnatural collapse. Persuading the leaders that the chamber was unstable, he staged a controlled collapse that sealed it, making his warning seem justified. The emotional toll on the town was devastating. These were friends and neighbors Hinrich had shared mining knowledge freely. Maria had taught local girls German songs. Wilhelm played daily with the other boys. Grief drove the men to physical exhaustion and beyond. While women prayed in the church, their German hymns echoing the Kellermans' own voices. By Christmas Eve, after 24 hours of backbreaking, dangerous work, Reverend Thornberry announced the rescue must end. The decision ignited heated arguments. Some accused others of quitting too soon, but Briggs positioned himself as the reluctant voice of reason. On Christmas morning, the entire community gathered at the sealed mine for a makeshift memorial. In the bitter cold, they sang in English and German, children laying flowers on the rubble. Heinrich's tools were placed at the entrance as a shrine. Martha's sewing basket, found in the cabin, was filled with letters of love and grief. Briggs stood among them, donating to a monument fund, his mask of sorrow flawless. Yet when 6-year-old Sarah Hartley tugged her father's sleeve and asked why God had taken her friend Wilhelm right before Christmas, Briggs felt an unexpected sting, an unwelcome reminder that even in perfectly executed operations, human grief was harder to bury. 4 days later, on December 27th, Harlan County Sheriff Marcus Webb opened the official investigation, the scene documented with what appeared to be meticulous care. Sheriff Marcus Webb, whose political rise had been generously financed by Cumberland Coal and Rail Company, spent 2 days at the collapse site sketching the debris field, interviewing rescuers, and recording townsfolk testimony. On the surface, it looked thorough and professional, exactly what a grieving community expected. But beneath the appearance of diligence lay the gaps Briggs had counted on. Webb never ordered a geological survey to test whether the rock strata were unstable enough to cause such devastation. He ignored the statistical improbability of an entire family being deep in the mine at the exact moment of a total collapse. And most tellingly, he never brought in an explosives expert to check for blast signatures in the rubble. Instead, Briggs stepped into that void, offering expert testimony on the supposed dangers of the Kellerman mine. He presented forged technical drawings and geological surveys crafted in the company's Louisville offices that mapped imaginary fault lines across the property. His delivery was so polished that Webb lifted entire sections of Briggs's fabricated analysis into his official report. Filed on December 30th, 1855. The report concluded that the collapse was due to structural inadequacies, common in hastily dug immigrant-owned mines, blaming a lack of engineering oversight rather than negligence or sabotage. The language was outwardly sympathetic, but subtly reinforced harmful stereotypes, hard-working but ignorant foreign miners, and conveniently absolved anyone of accountability. Thomas Hartley refused to accept it. His note, time-stamped 9:45 a.m., proved the mine had been sound less than half an hour before the blast. He knew Hinrich's skill, having seen the man run his operation for nearly a year without incident. But when he pressed Webb for answers, he was told that even experts could be fooled by hidden weaknesses. Seeing the danger, Briggs moved to discredit Hartley quietly. He whispered to townsfolk that Hartley's guilt over his ill-timed visit was clouding his mind, making him see conspiracies where none existed. He stressed Hartley's lack of mining experience and most effectively suggested that his constant questioning was preventing the town from healing. The pressure wore Hartley down. He tempered his public objections, though privately, he never let go of his conviction. In a diary his descendants would preserve for generations, Hartley wrote, there was nothing unstable about Hinrich's mine that morning. The supports were solid. The air was clear and the tunnel showed no signs of strain. Someone is lying about what happened to that family, and someday the truth will come out. The final flourish of the cover-up came in January 1856, when Jeremiah Whitlock himself arrived in Pine Ridge. Framed as a gesture of goodwill, Cumberland Coal and Rail offered to buy the Kellerman property from the county which now held it after the family died without a will, and pledged funds for a memorial. They promised jobs for local men in the company's expanded operations, prosperity rising from tragedy. Whitlock's arrival was carefully staged to disarm suspicion. He came on horseback like a working man, not in a gilded carriage, ensuring that what the community saw was not a ruthless industrialist, but a benefactor sharing their grief. Whitlock declined the boarding house, choosing instead to stay with local families, sharing their plain meals and listening to heartfelt stories about the Kellermans. His grief appeared genuine, his tone respectful, and his promises of prosperity carried the weight of hope in a community bowed under winter hardship and loss. The decisive moment came at a town meeting in Pine Ridge Church, where nearly every adult gathered. Whitlock spoke with practiced warmth, calling Hinrich Kellerman a testament to the American dream, an immigrant whose determination had uncovered a resource that could now benefit all. He pledged that Cumberland Coal and Rail would honor that legacy, developing the mine with professionalism and safety, turning tragedy into progress. He proposed a memorial fund, not only for a monument, but also for a scholarship to train local children in modern mining practices, ensuring such a disaster would never be repeated. For a community with few opportunities, the offer of steady, well-paying jobs was transformative. Whitlock stressed that his company's advanced engineering and safety procedures would protect workers, unlike the crude conditions under which the Kellermans had labored. Opposition was led by Thomas Hartley and a handful of others uneasy at how quickly the deal had materialized. Hartley argued that rushing to accept profits from the Kellermans' deaths risked dishonoring their memory, urging a year's delay for investigation and reflection. Reverend Thornberry echoed his caution, wary of rapid commercial expansion. Whitlock countered with urgency. Winter was harsh, jobs were scarce, and families were struggling. Honoring the Kellermans, he argued, meant ensuring their discovery lifted the community they loved. His most persuasive appeal promised safety through professional mining, preventing further loss. After 3 hours of debate, the vote favored Whitlock's plan 47-12. Those opposed, including Hartley, kept their dissent quiet to avoid being seen as blocking economic relief. Publicly, Hartley conceded, hoping his doubts were unfounded, and some good might yet come. Within 6 months, the Cumberland operation was in full swing. Modern equipment, professional oversight, and publicity-rich geological surveys, confirming the extraordinary richness of the vein Heinrich had found. No one in Pine Ridge questioned the timing. Whitlock had framed it as the natural fulfillment of the Kellerman's legacy. Jobs and wages transformed the town. New houses went up, children stayed in school longer, and isolation gave way to prosperity. The success silenced nearly all doubts about the collapse. Samuel Briggs remained for months under the guise of completing railroad surveys, his steady presence reinforcing the illusion that the tragedy had simply ushered in a safer, brighter era for Pine Ridge. Briggs carefully preserved his image as the impartial specialist who had guided Pine Ridge through grief toward stability. When he finally left in the summer of 1856, the town thanked him publicly for his help during their darkest days. By the following year, the Kellerman family had been reduced in memory to a cautionary tale proof in the accepted narrative of the dangers of amateur mining and the necessity of professional oversight. Their names were etched into a modest stone memorial in the Pine Ridge Cemetery, funded jointly by Cumberland Coal and Rail and local donations. The inscription meant as a tribute read, "In memory of the Kellerman family taken by the mountain they loved. Their sacrifice paved the way for progress and prosperity." It reflected a community's need to find meaning in loss, but also served the company's purposes, reinforcing the idea that their deaths were an unavoidable offering for the greater good. The word sacrifice implied willing submission, not calculated murder, while progress and prosperity reframed their deaths as the foundation of civic advancement rather than corporate greed. For 33 years, this official version stood unchallenged, tucked into Kentucky's mining history, alongside countless other early Appalachian tragedies. Mining safety advocates occasionally referenced it as an argument for professional engineering, never suspecting that the Kellerman's fate had been engineered in an entirely different way. Back in Louisville, Briggs was quietly promoted within Cumberland Coal and Rail, his efficient resolution of the Pine Ridge situation, earning him a reputation as the man to trust with the company's most delicate problems. In the decades that followed, he used the same cold precision to remove other obstacles, though he leaned increasingly on legal pressure and financial leverage. Having learned from Pine Ridge both the effectiveness and the danger of direct elimination. Whitlock, meanwhile, transformed the Kellerman vein into the cornerstone of a coal empire. Profits from that single mountain fueled Cumberland's expansion across Kentucky and beyond, elevating him into one of the Southeast's most celebrated industrialists. His name became synonymous with prosperity, modern mining techniques, and an industry-leading safety record, a record, ironically, built on the blood of the very family whose deaths made it possible. Only a handful of executives knew the truth about Pine Ridge, and they guarded it fiercely, bound by shared guilt, mutual interest, and the knowledge that exposure would not just ruin their careers, but endanger the livelihoods of thousands who depended on Cumberland's wages. Still like a buried seam of coal slowly pressing toward daylight, some truths refused to stay hidden forever. And so, the truth about the Kellerman family's murder, buried for 34 years, began to stir toward the surface, its revelations set in motion by the very man who had orchestrated their deaths. In the spring of 1889, Samuel Briggs, now 67, and slowly dying from the lung disease that plagued so many who had lived their lives in coal dust, lay in a narrow bed at Louisville's Charity Hospital. His breathing was shallow, his frame wasted, and his mind, long fortified by secrecy, was loosening under the combined weight of fever pain and decades of guilt. Father Michael O'Brien, a Catholic priest known for his work among the city's poor, came to administer last rites. An Irish immigrant himself, O'Brien had known prejudice and hardship firsthand, and his empathy for working families had made him a trusted confessor to many laborers whose livelihoods came with moral compromises. He expected a routine visit, the quiet prayers of the dying, But what he heard from Briggs was something else entirely. At first, the old man's words sounded like fevered ramblings. But the further Briggs went, the more precise, consistent, and impossible to dismiss his account became. He described the Kellerman property with uncanny accuracy, recalling the exact timbers Heinrich Kellerman had used for the tunnel supports, the layout of the ventilation shafts, and the sight lines from the surrounding hills. He recited private conversations with Jeremiah Whitlock, word-for-word meetings held in locked rooms with no other witnesses. Most disturbing of all, he spoke of the family's final morning in such intimate detail. The children's chatter, Martha's passing remark about the weather, the rhythm of their breakfast that O'Brien knew, these were not inventions. Briggs explained the sabotage like a man detailing a complex machine, how each charge was placed to mimic the signature of a natural collapse, how the timing was calculated to trap the family in the most dangerous section of the mine, and how he had staged the rescue effort to deflect suspicion. He told of feeding doubts into Thomas Hartley's guilt, of sealing off an air pocket before evidence could be found, of using Whitlock's public relations maneuver to cement the accident narrative. There was pride in his voice when he called the operation flawless pride that warred with a deep, almost childlike sorrow when he spoke of Wilhelm Kellerman playing in the town square days before his death. The contradiction seemed to have gnawed at him for decades, driving him to drink and hastening his decline. For Father O'Brien, the confession was a moral thunderclap. It was the calculated slaughter of an entire family for profit, an act so cold it demanded justice no matter how many years had passed. Yet the seal of confession bound him as tightly as iron shackles from revealing Briggs's words directly. The law of his church was unyielding. To break it was unthinkable, but O'Brien could investigate. He could search for the truth on his own, uncover evidence through means that appeared unrelated to the deathbed admission. If the proof emerged naturally, the sin of betrayal would not be his. It would be painstaking, quiet work, but it might still bring the truth to light. He began in the archives, poring over old newspapers and county records. The sheriff's official report was the first red flag. Its technical conclusions leaned almost entirely on testimony from one man, Samuel Briggs. That detail, in light of what O'Brien now knew, was not a coincidence, but a foundation stone in the wall of lies that had hidden the Kellerman's murder for more than 3 decades. There was no record of Briggs's credentials, no independent verification of his geological claims, and Father O'Brien quickly found an even more troubling truth. Sheriff Webb, the man responsible for the 1855 investigation, had received substantial campaign funding from Cumberland Coal and Rail, the single largest contributor to his election. The company's financial backing had been crucial in defeating a more experienced rival. Yet the conflict of interest had never been disclosed. Determined to follow the trail, O'Brien began tracking down surviving witnesses from the remote mountain community. Many had died or moved away, but he eventually located a few elderly residents whose memories of the disaster were still sharp. Their recollections, compared against the official record, revealed glaring contradictions. The most valuable find was Thomas Hartley, now 71, and living with his daughter in Lexington. Hartley had never abandoned his belief that the Kellerman collapse was no accident, and he had preserved meticulous records, the note he'd left at the mine that morning, descriptions of the mine's sound condition just before the blast, and a timeline of troubling events in the weeks prior. His notes described unknown men watching the Kellerman property, details that aligned precisely with Briggs's confession and documented the economic and legal harassment that the official investigation had brushed aside. Most damning were the original surveyor's reports Heinrich Kellerman had commissioned before purchasing the land. These reports showed stable rock formations and no fault lines, directly contradicting the geological fabrications Briggs later presented. The reports had been filed with the county clerk, yet omitted from Webb's inquiry, almost certainly by design. O'Brien knew he needed to get this information into the right hands without revealing its confessional origins. He engineered a chance meeting with Daniel Morrison, a hard-hitting journalist at the Louisville Courier-Journal, known for exposing corruption in Kentucky's coal industry. Over casual conversation at a mining safety meeting, O'Brien mentioned uncovering curious documents related to an old accident. Intrigued, Morrison accepted the priest's offer to share his academic research. The inconsistencies were enough to ignite Morrison's instincts. He began digging deeper, using his press contacts to trace the company's history of shady acquisitions. The breakthrough came. Morrison unearthed financial records showing large irregular payments from Cumberland Coal and Rail to Samuel Briggs in late 1855, payments labeled as consulting fees, but far higher than any legitimate surveying job, and timed perfectly to the Kellerman disaster. Similar payments surfaced in connection with other disputed properties. Further, Morrison confirmed that Jeremiah Whitlock had indeed visited Pine Ridge in the weeks after the collapse, contradicting official company records that denied his involvement. Locals remembered his generosity and uncanny knowledge of the mine's reserves, knowledge that could only have come from prior secret assessment. Then came the smoking gun, Briggs's own business records left behind in a trunk after his death. Inside were detailed property maps, receipts for explosives, and a hand-drawn diagram showing optimal blast points to mimic a natural collapse. The pattern matched the actual debris field with chilling precision. On September 15, 1889, the Courier-Journal began publishing Morrison's four-part expose headlined, "Murder in the Mines Company Conspiracy Behind Kellerman. Family Deaths Exposed After 34 Years." The articles dismantled the accident myth piece by piece, detailing the intimidation campaign, forged geological evidence, and the corporate greed that had motivated the murders. Public outrage was immediate and overwhelming. State and federal investigation funds opened, lawsuits poured in from families of other mining victims, and a boycott of Cumberland's coal spread across the Ohio Valley. The company's stock collapsed. Major clients canceled contracts. Whitlock, now 73, saw his reputation and empire evaporate in weeks. Once hailed as a visionary industrialist, he was unmasked as the architect of multiple murders. The weight of evidence destroyed his denials, and his health crumbled under the strain. Friends described him as paranoid and aged beyond recognition. 3 weeks after the first article appeared, he died of a heart attack. Whether from shame, fear, or coincidence remained a matter of debate. His funeral, intended as a triumphal send-off, was sparsely attended and shadowed by protesters demanding justice for the Kellermans. Legally, the passage of time and the deaths of key figures made prosecutions difficult. The state filed posthumous charges against Briggs and launched investigations into Cumberland's entire history of land acquisitions. More importantly, the Kellerman case became a rallying cry for labor activists and mining safety advocates, cited in congressional hearings and fueling demands for stronger corporate regulation and criminal penalties for executives. It inspired a wave of reinvestigations into suspicious mining disasters, some of which revealed their own histories of corporate violence. Cumberland Coal and Rail never recovered. Bankrupt within 6 months of the expose, its collapse stood as a stark warning, though a warning written in the blood of the Kellerman family. Its assets were eventually sold off, with the Kellerman mine itself purchased by a worker-owned cooperative that ran it until the rich seam was finally exhausted in the early 20th century. A twist of history that Hinrich might have found both bitterly ironic and deeply satisfying. The coal vein he discovered continued to generate wealth for decades. But under the cooperative model, those profits were shared among the miners instead of lining corporate coffers. The cooperative also implemented safety standards far exceeding industry norms, ensuring no other family would suffer the Kellerman's fate through neglect or calculated violence. Thomas Hartley lived to see his long fight for the truth vindicated. Now hailed as a hero, he spent his final years speaking to mining towns about the need to hold corporations accountable, and his meticulous records of the case became part of the Kentucky State Archives. Father Michael O'Brien continued his ministry, But the Kellerman murders left a permanent mark on him, fueling his advocacy for social justice. He never revealed his role in exposing the crime, keeping the seal of confession intact. But his private papers found after his death documented the moral tightrope he had walked to honor both his faith and his conscience. The scandal's impact stretched far beyond Kentucky's coal fields. National newspapers covered it as a symbol of Gilded Age corruption, with labor leaders and reformers citing it as proof that unchecked corporate power threatened democracy itself. In 1955, exactly a century after the murders, the mine was abandoned, and local historians, descendants of Pine Ridge families, and labor groups dedicated a proper memorial not to accident victims, but to the Kellermans murdered for defying corporate greed. Built from limestone Heinrich had once quarried, it bore an inscription telling the unvarnished truth. German immigrants who came to America seeking opportunity and found instead that some lives were expendable when weighed against profit. Murdered December 23, 1855, for refusing to surrender their dreams. Today, the overgrown mine entrance stands as both a historical site and a warning. Visitors, historians, activists, and tourists come to learn the story through educational programs and a small museum displaying Morrison's original articles, O'Brien's notes, Hartley's documentation, and even Briggs's recovered sabotage plans. The Kellerman case is now taught in schools as an example of how determined individuals can challenge power and eventually prevail. It is also a reminder of the long arc of justice, how crimes thought buried can be unearthed when conscience evidence and changing public attitudes align. The 34-year delay in exposing the murders shows both the power of corporate influence to suppress the truth and its ultimate inability to erase it forever. The Kellerman tragedy stands as proof that behind the triumphant tales of industrial progress lie hidden histories of calculated cruelty, and as a testament to the redemptive power of truth-telling, even when justice comes decades late.